Your home is safe, you provide for her, you are a good husband. But in her head, there's a stranger. Let's talk about why. The modern narrative tells us that keeping a relationship thriving requires total transparency. It insists that a man must be an entirely open book, thoroughly safe, and entirely compliant to secure his household. But perfect domesticity creates a psychological vacuum. You eventually hit a point where there is nothing left to discover, and familiarity is the exact opposite of desire. When you become entirely mapped out, the romantic spark doesn't quietly fade away. It seeks a new outlet. It moves out of the living room and into the hidden theater of the imagination. The archetype of the modern good husband is a man whose reactions, thoughts, and daily routines are perfectly understood. He leaves his shoes in the exact same spot and answers questions exactly how she expects. Without any unscripted moments, a relationship loses its necessary friction. Every reaction you have is mapped and accounted for before you even speak. Humans possess a raw, biological craving for psychological tension. A highly regulated, frictionless household starves that instinct completely. Stripping away unpredictability guarantees absolute security. Yet, in the process of building that perfectly safe harbor, you actively erase the psychological edge required to sustain physical attraction. There is a deep biological contradiction at play here. The human brain is logically wired to fear the unknown, but the human limbic system is entirely addicted to it. This neurological chart shows how predictable security maps out in the brain. You see a flatlined dopamine wave. Routine calms the nervous system but kills excitement. Watch the timeline transition to unpredictable danger. The wave erupts into massive dopamine spikes. The stranger functions as a trigger for this exact chemical spike. He releases that intoxicating dopamine simply by existing as an unscripted variable, a presence where she doesn't know what will happen next. The fantasy is a raw biological mechanism. It is designed to chase a chemical high that a perfectly paid mortgage and a quiet domestic routine simply cannot generate. Long-term relationships demand two conflicting roles. She needs an anchor for safety, but requires the wild for desire. When a husband collapses entirely into the protector role, he absorbs himself in being perfectly agreeable, relentlessly kind, and overwhelmingly safe. This animated polarity chart visually tracks that shift. Two distinct magnetic poles, the anchor and the wild, slowly collapse into a single neutralized center point, zero polarity and total safety. The other man in her head operates at the exact opposite end of that spectrum. He doesn't have a mortgage, he doesn't ask for permission, and he is entirely free of domestic rules. He represents pure, unbridled capability. Extreme safety inadvertently suffocates desire. By succeeding at being a flawless, predictable provider, a man accidentally turns himself into a romantic ghost. Knowing this hidden reality exists should not make you paranoid. The presence of this fantasy does not mean she actually wants to destroy her family or walk out the door. This fantasy isn't about a specific individual. It is about a silhouette that fills the gaps in a domestic environment. Because the figure has no flaws, no history, and no mortgage, he exists strictly as a placeholder for the unknown. The human mind uses this fantasy as a subconscious coping mechanism. It steps in to manufacture the missing polarity that the excessively safe marriage lacks. What she craves is strictly a psychological edge. It is a hunger for tension, not a desire to tear down her actual real-world life. The fantasy is a natural byproduct of domesticity. It reveals a specific hunger for tension that love alone cannot satisfy. The worst way to react to this is to police her thoughts or suddenly start acting destructively at home. Doing so immediately destroys your status and value. The actual cure requires a deliberate, conscious choice. You have to remain an unfinished piece of business. In practice, this means holding firmly to your own frame. You maintain a separate personal path in life, and you refuse to become a completely mapped-out open book. Stop trying to be safe all the time. Bring back the mystery that made her look at you in the first place. Stay grounded, stay a man. It is the only way to remain both a safe harbor and an object of deep desire.